Okay, looks like the live streaming software says it is live, even though YouTube doesn't have the button to click to go live. I still hate the new software upgrade. So YouTube, if you're listening, please change it. Anyways, over the weekend, President Trump made some very interesting announcements, but I took a few days off, about 4 days off, to recharge the batteries, get some more sleep. I spent a lot of time working on that slide deck for George Gammon for that interview that I gave away for free. I did not have to do that, but I spent a lot of time trying to help people out with the offense and defense there to try to beat, to survive and thrive, stagflate and tax and lie. So hopefully people got a lot out of it. For my patrons, the full slide deck is available behind the paywall for only $5 a month. You can join and be one of over 1,000 people with lots of content, information, analysis, and financial education behind the paywall, chipping in so I can continue to grow my little small business here, my investor education and research business online. So let's get into, before I talk about the US Treasury General Account and some of the comments that President Trump either announced or offhand made over the weekend, and there's quite a lot of pretty crazy ones. According to the Twitter handle FX Hedge, there's a lot of them. Who knows if actually all of them come to fruition or not, and then I'll try to fit some of this into the stagflate and tax and lie framework. But Alexis de Tocqueville, he's a famous political philosopher. He wrote a book, I think in the mid-1800s, called Democracy in America. He toured the United States, what was the United States at the time, and he predicted ultimately that the democratic style of government, because it was a republic back then, it was a constitutional republic, that it would ultimately fail because the politicians, Congress, would start to bribe the people with their own money. So this is basically the case, and now with fiat currency and the Federal Reserve and digital debt-based fiat currency in the printing press, this is even more the case than it was back in de Tocqueville's time when he made the prediction. So a lot of experts have been wondering what the US Treasury would do with the massive amount of the Treasury General Account. So experts like George Gammon have been covering this for many months. Lynn Alden was talking about, I think the US Treasury was projecting that about $800 billion worth of the massive amount of the US Treasury General Account would be used before the year was over. And it made a lot of sense, the prediction that Lynn Alden was making, because why would they just hold the cash, especially when the US's debt ceiling was pushed back, I think, through 2021, and also because this is an election year. So the incumbent, President Trump, the Trump administration, it would make sense for them to not hoard, to keep the amount of the capital in the U.S. Treasury General Account, to keep it at nosebleed levels, to eventually start spending that cash. And over the weekend, I think we got announcements coming out that it looks like that is indeed the case. So the U.S. Treasury General Account got to levels as high as 1.816.687 trillion, according to the St. Louis Fed website on Wednesday, July 29th, but it's been coming down a little bit. However, over the weekend, the announcements have started to come out fast and furious that President Trump wants to deploy a lot of that with payroll tax cuts and extension of unemployment benefits, although not the full amount, the $600 extra per week, I guess. It looks like, according to this article from Rachel Sandler from Forbes, that the $600 unemployment check is cut down to $300 for federal level under Trump executive orders, and the states asked to add $100 to that. So President Trump had to go around Congress, and this shows how broken things are here in D.C., that Republicans and Democrats, especially because this is an election year, Democrats are viewing that any type of compromise would potentially help Trump. So we had President Trump having to do an executive order, and this does not bode well. And I've talked about this a lot in the past. Executive orders from presidents do not bode well, because eventually the other party will be in control, and the executive orders, the amount of them are just going to get crazier and crazier and crazier. And there's been a lot of executive orders the last couple decades, and they've increased compared to the past. So Obama had a lot of executive orders, President Trump has had a lot of executive orders, and whoever comes after President Trump, it does not bode well for that. But the executive orders, in my opinion, show how broken things are, how broken Congress is, how corrupt Congress is and how corrupt the swamp creatures and bureaucracy is here in DC. There is way too much waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse in the bureaucracy here in DC from permanent federal government employees. Most Americans are not aware of this, but about 80% of the U.S. federal government budget is locked in, as in cannot be cut without, really there's almost no ways to cut it. So cannot be cut, and that budget is locked in 5 years in advance. So the people in Congress, money can be moved around a little bit, but the White House, whoever's in the White House, people in Congress, they're not fighting over massive cuts in budgets or massive amounts of capital that can be redirected. So yes, it sounds like a massive numbers, but overall, the total size of the government budget, 80% of it is locked in for the next 5 years. And it's been this way for a very long time. So the mainstream financial media talks about this political party or that political party is moving the budget and misallocating so much of the government budget. But the truth, that's not the truth. The truth is your vote doesn't really matter a whole bunch because the federal government bureaucracy, the swamp creatures, the lobbyists, the status quo does not really change. And when change candidates have come to DC for decades, and I've been here 20 years, when change candidates come from either party, very little, in reality, a number of years later, very little change actually happens. And most likely the candidates end up getting bribed or bought off. Okay, so President Trump on Saturday signed executive orders offering less unemployment insurance than the last coronavirus relief bill, extending predictions for student borrowers and renters, along with a measure temporarily deferring the payroll tax. After negotiations on Capitol Hill for a global pandemic relief bill broke down this week, the order continues weekly unemployment payments that expired in July under the previous relief bill, but cuts the benefit to $400 from $600 and directs states to cover 25% of the cost. Under the CARES Act passed in late March, the $600 payment was fully paid for by the federal government, but under the current executive order from President Trump, the federal government is on the hook for $300, while states are being asked to pay $100. The measures which will not help the state budgets, the Democrat state budgets that are asking for bailouts, that the Democrat politicians are desperately begging for bailouts. The measures do not include another round of $1,200 stimulus checks. Trump said the order also allows employers to defer payment of the employee portion of the payroll tax for workers making less than $100,000 per year, retroactively starting August 1st until the end of the year. Trump added that he will make permanent cuts to payroll taxes if he's elected for a second term in November. I think he's trying to stimulate consumer spending because the amount of consumer spending indexes that have come out in the last 6 weeks or so have looked really, really bad, because I think a lot of people were aware that their forbearances on their car payment and their mortgage payment and their rent and the extra $600 a week, I think, in unemployment was not going to last. So I think people started to trim down their consumer spending, and that was being reflected in the consumer spending data. And so much of the U.S. economy is still predicated on consumer spending. According to the U.S. GDP statistics, about 70% of the economy, give or take, is based on consumer spending. And most consumers do not have really stable jobs right now, or much of savings. Okay, Trump has long called for a payroll tax cut the problem with cutting the payroll tax is a lot of that payroll tax ends up for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, some of the other payments there. So Trump has actually said, according to some of the tweets that came out from FX Hedge that was quoting some of his off the cuff like speeches or interviews over the weekend starting on August 7th, he has said, let me read some of them real quick. So the first one was Trump says he will suspend payroll tax until the end of the year and retroactive to July 1st. Trump also said if Democrats hold the relief bill hostage, he will act under his own authority. So we've seen that. Trump says unemployment benefits will be extended to the end of the year. Trump says if and when he wins, he will make deals with Iran and North Korea quickly. Yeah, I don't really believe that. Trump says we'll have the money for unemployment insurance extension even without Congress. And it says there's added here, just ask the Fed for it. No, it's the US Treasury General Account. That's what all that cash build up in the US Treasury General Account was being used for. as a potential quantitative easing or stimulus bill prior to the 2020 reelection, to I think it's going to be politically targeted for certain types of income levels and to try to buy votes. So this goes back to what Alexis de Tocqueville said about democracy in America, predicting the ultimate downfall of the US before a central bank was being put in and digital debt-based fiat currency, that politicians would eventually bribe people with their own capital for votes. So that appears to be the strategy for Trump to help him increase the odds for re-election. Trump to sign executive orders on, okay, let me skip that part. Okay, Trump executive order declares a payroll tax holiday from August 1st to the end of the year. This is crazy here, some of the stuff that Trump said off the cuff. Trump may forgive taxes if reelected on August 8th. He said that. FX Hedge is reporting that. Trump unemployment benefit extension will be $400 a week. Okay, but that's not all at the federal level. Trump is looking at middle class income and capital gains tax cuts. So this would increase from... I try to look at everything either from an Austrian School of Economics perspective, but now we're going to be looking at things from a stagflating tax and lie perspective. If Trump cuts middle-class income tax and capital gains tax, this would drastically increase the stagflate portion. So he's willing to, and the Fed is willing to, and the Treasury is willing to. And this Twitter handle, FX Hedge, reported that the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve had 16 meetings in the month of July. 16. So that's on average, almost every 2 days. But the tax cuts here are based on supply side economics, which is what Trump believes in, which is still interventionist economics, although not the same as Keynesian economics. But that would try to increase velocity of money, and that would accelerate the stagflate portion of stagflate and tax and lie. So I don't know if there will be more middle-class income tax cuts and capital gains tax cuts. And obviously, if Trump doesn't win the 2020 election, those payroll tax cuts are going to be gone. Because from a stagflate and tax and lie perspective, Joe Biden is going to be very heavy on the tax portion. And he will probably also be heavy on the stagflate portion, but it will be the money will be, the capital will be misallocated or malinvested a lot differently than with Trump. And then there's a theory out there, I think Dave from X22 report is saying that Trump is intentionally trying to get negative interest rates, and that negative interest rates will hurt the Wall Street banks and will hurt the Federal Reserve. But the problem with negative interest rate policy is it will hurt the private sector even more. We've seen this in the European Union. We've seen this with real negative interest rates in Japan. With the manipulation of interest rates, the private sector gets creamed on negative interest rate policy. So savers get creamed, businesses get creamed. If you're familiar with capital asset pricing model or discounted cash flow analysis or the net present value of future discounted cash flows, if you have negative interest rates, there is no risk-free rate to discount cash flows if you have negative interest rates. So if interest rates are 0 or lower, there is no risk-free rate to discount those cash flows, which means making investments is going to be very difficult, very, very difficult to project cash flows. So the private sector, those distortions, those unintended consequences, the malinvestment could be enormous. Now, the negative interest rates would benefit the government because then the government would be able to borrow even more, paying little to no interest rates, and the government would have more control over the economy. So from a government perspective, negative interest rate policy is great. From a private sector perspective, it is absolutely horrible. It is one of the worst ideas in the history of economics and in the history of finance. Because discounted cash flow analysis, net present value of future discounted cash flows, the capital asset pricing model, which uses a version of discounted cash flow analysis to look at stocks and bonds as investments and modern portfolio theory, all use the US Treasury, normally the 10-year US Treasury, to discount as a risk-free return, to discount all other potential investments off of. So NIRP, negative interest rate policy, if anyone tells you that it would benefit the private sector, it really would not. My friend Daniel Lacalle from Europe has written extensive articles on this for the Mises Institute over the last couple years about how negative interest rate policy has absolutely decimated the private sector in the European Union, whether that's banks, insurance companies, pension funds, savers, just a long list of people in the private sector that have been decimated by negative interest rate policy in Europe. Now, if you're a hedge fund manager in the European Union and you were front running the European Central Bank on their government bond purchases and their corporate bond purchases, so you knew that the European Central Bank was going to buy certain types of bonds, and you were buying the bonds ahead of the European Central Bank, and then leveraging up those bond trades and flipping them to the European Central Bank at a profit, you benefited from that. And this is what's dangerous with derivatives and over leverage. That we have all these entities now that are not hedge funds acting like hedge funds. So where's the stimulus checks? Tell the Fed to start cutting some free money checks. No, it's going to come from the US Treasury General Account. Although the Fed's official balance sheet has been flat now, give or take, it's been back and forth since May 13th. It's back down to right around levels from May 13th. I don't believe those numbers. I agree with Ron Paul, Dr. Ron Paul, we need a Fed audit. We won't get one, but we need another one. We had the partial Fed audit. We need a full one. And why is Apple, which supposedly has well over $100 billion in cash, why is the Fed buying corporate bonds from Apple? They should not be. This is just government distorting things even more, creating permanent distortions, massive distortions. I've written articles about distortions for my patrons and how bad the distortions are now and how worse they're going to get. And this is why all this crazy stuff, this is why the gold price is well above $2,000 an ounce. And it's going to stay above, hopefully stay above 2,000, and it's going to keep going higher. Because all that's left until the economy is back to pre-pandemic levels of cash flows is bailouts and rules changes. That's all that's left. They can hand out stimulus checks and they can say that's going to benefit the economy. They can buy corporate bonds. Why are they buying corporate bonds from Apple? Apple has a lot of cash. They should not be buying corporate bonds from Apple. Doesn't make any sense. Unless you understand how corrupt and the cronyism. How corrupt everything is in the cronyism. Welcome to dystopia. Dollar index appears to have found some support levels. It's stuck around 93-ish. It's only gone down below 93 a little bit lately. So it may be bottom bouncing there, finding some support levels. I still think that the dollar tug of war is happening. Please click, tap, or smash the like button if you like the content. And if you just came over because of the George Gammon interview I did, take a look at my other content. There is over 10 years worth of free content. Over a decade. With lots of interviews with experts, live stream shows, and short videos. There was one guy alleging I was a fraud, that I have not interviewed 500 people. And I was like, dude, all you have to do, this guy must be really lazy. All you have to do is just go to my YouTube channel and look in the archives and look at all the experts I've interviewed. He was claiming that I'm a fraud, that I have not read 500 books. It's actually over 500 because I read a lot of initial books. I started reading in 2007. I'm almost 40 years old now. I know I don't sound like it. Started reading a lot of books. At one point, it was 2 books a week. Sometimes 3. And then he was claiming that I was lying about having interviewed 500 experts. I was like, dude, 5 minutes of research. Are you really that lazy? You can go to my YouTube channel and look in the archives. People are ridiculous sometimes. Victor says, so the government is willing to take a tax revenue decrease to win an election. It sounds like that, but there might not have been tax revenues at all, Victor, because there's not a lot of full-time employees now. So cutting payroll taxes for revenues that might not have existed, it's not a horrible idea if you're trying to win an election. Super chat from Martin. Thank you for the super chat. He says he loves my work. Thank you. So you're welcome, Martin. He's curious. Am I a fan of Jim Rickards' work? I've read all of Jim Rickards' books. I've interviewed him a good amount of times. I think at least a half a dozen times in the archives. Pretty much every single time a new book comes out, I interview him. I agree with certain parts of his research and analysis, and other parts I do not agree. So that's how it is with a lot of other experts. There are certain parts of their work I agree with and other parts I do not. Although some experts like Harry Dent, I don't agree with pretty much anything. And other junior mining stock pickers who are shady, I might not agree with anything they say either. Or not trust anything they say. I think track record is important. So there's guys out there that are making 6 or 7 figures. Some of them are making 8 figures a year on their paid investment newsletters, and they have the worst track record for stock picks over 10, 20, 30 years, and yet they make a lot of money selling, based on marketing, selling fear porn. Thank you for the super chat, J6, $4.99, much appreciated. Super chat from Conrad, $5. Thank you for the super chat. He says he loves the vids. I was wondering if you think VA disability pay would ever be cut in the future. You are 100% disabled through the VA, and I need that dollars. I think the way the government scams work is it's nominal versus real and the real returns would account for real inflation rate. So George Gammon has talked about this, where the type of inflation measurement is changed again with the chain CPI. So the cost of living adjustments, you are not going to get a real inflation rate on your cost of living adjustments. Conrad, you're going to need to find another source of income. You're going to need to find like a side hustle online, or partner with someone else, or provide capital to a side business. So if you're worried about your standard of living or your VA benefits being cut, you're going to have to come up with it's not fair, but this is what the government has decided to do. So your checks may stay the same, but if the government is successful at much worse, stagflate and tax and lie, those checks are going to be buying you a lot less in the future so your standard of living is going to drastically decrease with stagflate and tax and lie the more successful the government is with that scheme. So you might maintain the same nominal amount on your checks, but those checks are going to be buying you over the next couple of years a lot less. And over the next couple of years about that, your purchasing power is going to be a lot less. So you are going to have to learn to play better offense. To stick with the sports analogy from Stagflate and Tax and Lie about my interview that was released on Friday with George Gammon. You're going to have to come up with family or friends. It's not fair, but unfortunately to survive, this is what we have to do. I'm doing this right now with my own business. So I have to play offense and defense too. My savings are not saved in fiat currencies unless I'm keeping cash to either look for stocks or to make investments into my business. Hopefully in the next couple of months, I will have a new website. Got a really pretty angry email from someone who saw my George Gammon interview and said my websites were an embarrassment. It's like I've been working my ass off to build my YouTube channel and get my paying customers, and then the money will be reinvested into the business for website upgrades and other things. There was limited resources there for a while, and now I'm going to start hopefully reinvesting. I have to speak with website developers and make sure I don't get ripped off, though, because I've had bad experiences with website developers in the past. So your cost of living adjustments, you're not going to get a higher check. You're going to have to save yourself. You're going to have to prepare for stagflate and tax and lie on your own. It sucks. No one wants to hear that. It's hard work. Preparing, playing offense and defense, getting family and friends on board. It is what it is. My family members are not on board with any of the stuff I'm saying here. They've never listened to any of my podcasts or any of my videos. They don't own any gold or silver. The silver I bought my dad for years now, I think he sold it all. They don't own any gold stocks. I've tried having long conversations with my parents. They don't believe anything I say. Okay, well, I've talked about cashless society, Anthony. Yeah, so I've talked about government cryptocurrencies and cashless society. There are tons of news stories coming out every week from governments that are moving, press releases from CoinDesk that is covering this, and Reuters and Bloomberg, of governments that are moving along their government cryptocurrencies. So I think that's where we're headed. Okay, well, I think that's it for this short little live stream show. The links to the US Treasury General Account and the story about some of the executive orders that came out over the weekend about President Trump. But I think ultimately this is President Trump trying to help increase the odds of re-election for 2020. He is trying to let inflation run hot. He is trying to get consumer spending back up. And this fits within stagflate and tax and lie, because if he does cut the taxes and they do stay for a while, I mean, the real economy is not generating a lot of cash flows, and cash flows are what is taxed, except for property taxes. But the majority of taxes come from actual economic activity. So cutting taxes where there is no economic activity, it looks bad. But if there is no economic activity, there's no taxes, or little or no taxes. But this would drastically increase, or at least attempt to, the stagflate component. And we'll just have to watch velocity of money. If velocity of money picks up, it could be much, much worse stagflation, or even worse than that. Okay, super chat finally from Off Topic Rayard. Thank you for the $5. It's much appreciated. And everyone have a great week. Oh, last thing before I end the live stream show tonight, I do have 2 good interviews booked for tomorrow, for Monday and Tuesday, for guest interviews. So hopefully there are no cancellations or reschedulings, and hopefully there are no problems with Zoom recording the audio. Because unfortunately it looks like there is a problem with the James Grant interview. I haven't heard back now from Zoom customer service in a week, and I did the interview over 2 weeks ago with James Grant. It was a really good interview. It looks like I may have to reach out and redo the interview and just hope that Zoom doesn't ruin it, because I'm not hearing back from Zoom customer service. I was hearing back, and now I'm not hearing back. So I'm guessing that there was a problem. They told me there was not a problem retrieving the 50 plus minutes of audio, and now I'm guessing that there is a problem. They don't want to tell me that there is a problem. They don't want to admit that they screwed it up.